Chicago, also known as the Windy City, today known for high-rises, penthouses, deep dish pizza, and much more. But Chicago didn't always have apartments the size of a small house. Up until about 150 years ago, Chicago's original home style was the worker's cottage. It had a slim, rectangular design so it could fit on a city lot. The worker's cottage had a picture gable roof, and most are 1.5 stories, featuring an attic or a smaller upper room under the angle of the roof. The worker's cottage was made of wood. The worker's cottage was great because it gave workers affordable housing and middle-class homeowners a great option. Also, being a smaller home style allowed many to fit in a neighborhood. However, that all changed when the Great Chicago Fire destroyed a large portion of Chicago. The fire started the evening of October 8, 1871. Rumor has it the fire started in a barn on the southwest side of Chicago. Lasting for 36 hours, it burned throughout the heart of Chicago. This killed 300 people and left 1/3 of Chicago's population homeless. Chicago's population in 1871 was 334,270, leaving over 100,000 people homeless. But remember how I said the fire started in a barn? Well, this is one of many rumors of how the fire started. One of the rumors is that Miss O'Leary was milking her cow and allegedly it knocked over a lantern. The fire had burned for almost 2 days, and believe it or not, the fire was put out from rain on October 10, 1871. A big reason the fire burnt was because the most common material used back then was wood. The Great Rebuilding. Shortly after the fire, the Great Rebuilding started. New laws passed for fireproof materials like stone, brick, limestone, and marble to be required for the construction of new buildings and homes. Unlike the wood used before the fire, the new materials required mortar to be used. But there was a problem with these fireproof materials. They were more expensive than the wood used before. There were many residents of Chicago that could not afford these new materials. But that's not all. There was another issue. Many residents before the fire had fire insurance, but several lost their insurance because their policies burnt in the fire, leaving many Chicagoans forced to leave Chicago. But the Great Rebuilding brought many immigrants to Chicago. Many people got jobs in factories, meatpacking plants, but there was also people immigrating to Chicago to get jobs in construction. These immigrants had cultural influence on the architectural styles of Chicago's new homes. Bungalows. Even though the Great Chicago Fire had huge impact on new architectural changes on homes, it wouldn't be until 1910, 39 years after the fire, that Chicago would start seeing its first bungalows being built. Now you may say to yourself, how does the bungalow have to do anything with the Great Chicago Fire if the home style didn't start being built in Chicago until almost 40 years after the fire? Well, the fire burned 3.5 square miles according to Britannica.com. And while 3.5 square miles doesn't sound like that much, Chicago is a very densely populated city. Like I said earlier, the fire affected over 100,000 people. This of course meant a lot of houses and buildings needed to be rebuilt, and many people moved to Chicago for jobs. This made the population of Chicago go up. The population of Chicago in 1871 was just over 334,000. However, in 1910 it was up to 2.2 million. So, there needed to be a cost-effective home style that was also narrow to fit as many as possible in the neighborhood, and also used fireproof materials. Hence, the Chicago bungalow was born. The Chicago bungalow features a brick exterior and a low-pitched hipped roof with wide overhangs and is generally 1.5 stories. You might say, what does 1.5 stories mean? Well, that means there is a main level and an attic generally is an extra bedroom. Today, bungalows are no longer being built in Chicago. Bungalow construction stopped in the 1940s. There are over 80,000 bungalows in Chicago today, and often there will be neighborhoods full of bungalows in the Windy City, all looking very similar. I truly believe that if the Great Chicago Fire never happened, Chicago would probably never had bungalows, and also might have not become the 3rd largest city in the US. The Great Chicago Fire was a terrible event, causing $200 million in damage, over 100,000 people homeless, and 300 dead, leaving 3.5 square miles burnt and 73 miles of street burnt, and 17,500 buildings burned. But even with all that bad the fire brought, I believe it brought good to Chicago, giving many people jobs. The Great Rebuilding made Chicago more developed and more homes were built. This was how the Great Chicago Fire brought the bungalow to the Windy City. I want to thank you so much for watching. Peace out.